I was 32 years old and still a virgin, though nobody in Willow Bend ever suspected it. Out here in the unforgiving stretches of the frontier, a man's value was measured not by romance or companionship, but by the strength in his arms, the steadiness of his aim, and the way he faced the endless trials of dust, wind, and lonely nights. Folks called me Quiet Sam, a nickname earned more by circumstance than choice, because I spoke only when necessary, kept my eyes on the horizon, and let the world churn without trying to own a place in it. My days were predictable in their solitude, dawn breaking with the sound of crows and the low whinny of my horse. Hours spent mending fences that never seemed to last, hauling water to the cabin that stubbornly refused to warm in the biting night, and listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the wood like the sigh of 1,000 lost souls. I had never held a woman in my arms, never felt a heart pressed against mine in the long, quiet hours of night, never shared the warmth of companionship that people whispered about in the saloons where laughter and whiskey mingled freely. I thought it was just the way life was meant to be for someone like me, ordinary, overlooked, unclaimed by love or passion. But all of that changed the day Widow Elara Boone rode into town. She appeared on the horizon like a figure painted against the blood-orange sky of a dying summer. Her dark hair tangled by wind, her dress streaked with dust, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, carrying the invisible weight of a life that had been violently interrupted by the death of her husband in a mining collapse that left her with nothing but a small cabin, a stubborn mare, and a piece of land so rich in water that it drew the kind of men who measured people by what they could steal. The sheriff, seeing the danger surrounding her and the limits of his deputies, turned to me, a man who had lived quietly, unnoticed, unremarkable, and said, "Sam, she trusts you. Stay with her for a few nights." I barely understood why a woman so gentle and fierce could place her trust in a man like me. But when she stepped closer, voice trembling, and whispered, "Please, I don't want to face them alone," something inside my chest tightened like a rope around my heart. Something I didn't have a name for, a mixture of fear, hope, and a strange pull toward a purpose I'd never had before. I saddled my horse and rode with her through the fading light, the world around us turning orange and red and then black, knowing that the next 3 nights would test every fiber of my being, not only in courage and survival, but in something far deeper, the opening of a heart I had kept shuttered for 32 long years. By the time we arrived at her lonely cabin, with the wind whispering threats and the shadows of the hills curling like dark fingers around the timber, I understood that the silence and isolation I had so carefully maintained would never return, and that for the first time in my life, I would be called upon to protect someone not from the elements, not from the work that defined my days, but from men who would gladly take her peace, her home, and even her life if they dared. And as I stood there in the doorway, feeling the weight of her trust, the hum of the wind, and the quiet pulse of the land beneath our boots, I realized with a startling clarity that life, in all its lonely years, had been preparing me for this moment, not for heroics, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the simple, impossible act of keeping someone safe who had chosen to believe in me, a man who had lived unnoticed, and to do so in a way that would forever change the way I understood courage, connection, and the fragile, luminous power of trust. Asterisk the first night. The wind battered the cabin like a restless ghost, rattling shutters and sending shadows crawling across the floor. I gave Elara my bed and settled in the old wooden chair, rifle across my lap, boots planted firm, listening to every sound outside. Coyotes cried in the distance, and branches scraped the walls like fingers seeking entry. She tried to sleep, murmuring her husband's name in her restless dreams, her body tensing with each groan of timber. Lightning split the sky, and she gasped, waking with a start. I whispered reassurance, though my own pulse raced with tension I had never known. "You're safe," I said, soft enough to soothe, but firm enough to promise protection. She looked at me with eyes that held gratitude and something more fragile, almost vulnerable, and whispered, "Thank you." Sam, it struck me then how rare it was to feel truly needed. To know someone's life could depend on you, not by obligation but by trust. The second night, the threat became tangible. Hoofbeats circled the cabin, slow and deliberate, like predators testing their prey. Elara clutched my arm, voice quivering. "Sam, don't sit in that chair tonight, please." Her request was simple, but it carried a weight that I had never experienced, a silent plea for closeness, safety, and reassurance. I lay beside her, careful and awkward, aware of every heartbeat, every breath. She rested her head on my shoulder, hand brushing mine, asking for nothing more than the comfort of shared presence. Outside, the shadows shifted, and we both stayed still, letting the world pause around us. In that quiet, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I realized that trust and companionship could be as powerful as any gun or fist on the frontier. Asterisk, by the third night, danger arrived at last. 3 riders approached under the pale moonlight, guns glinting, boots whispering over the dirt. I stepped outside with trembling hands, rifle ready. "Turn back," I warned, my voice steadier than I felt. The leader fired, and the night erupted with gunpowder and chaos. When the smoke cleared, the riders had fled, leaving only dust and echoes behind. I returned to the cabin, heart pounding, adrenaline still humming in my veins. Elara met me at the door, her hands trembling on my face, eyes wide with relief and something deeper I couldn't name. "Sam, stay. Not just tonight." In that moment, I realized the depth of connection a human could share, not through words, not through deeds alone, but in trust and presence. Asterisk, the following nights were quieter but no less significant. We moved through fear together, shared warmth in the still hours, and discovered that closeness need not be hurried or forceful to be profound. She spoke softly of loss, of loneliness, of the life that had been stolen from her, and I listened, offering a steady presence that in its simplicity meant more than any grand gesture ever could. By the end of the third night, I was no longer the man who had lived alone for 32 years. Quiet Sam had changed. I understood for the first time what it meant to be truly alive, not through victory over men or hardship, but through the quiet miracle of trust, protection, and the shared heartbeat of 2 people who found solace in each other amid a world that so often threatened to leave them lonely. And though I had been untouched all my life, I knew that I had gained something far more precious, the knowledge that being needed, being chosen, and being trusted could awaken a soul in ways nothing else ever could.